And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. And today, my guest is Sarah Wilson. Sarah is the founder of Pop Communications, which is a very cool company that does book launch management, public relations, speaker management, all sorts of services for Fortune 500 executives and industry thought leaders. So she's on sort of my side of the world in terms of being of service to thought leaders. So welcome aboard, Sarah. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Peter. It's nice to be on with you today.
Oh, my pleasure. So let's just sort of dive in. So someone out there is a thought leader that's listening, and they're trying, or an aspiring thought leader, or want to increase their thought leadership, and they come to you. What are the things that you would ask them or advise them to be thinking about in order to get their work out there?
And this is where I think that customization of services is so important because as I know, you know very well, different things move the needle for different authors and different thought leaders. So, and discovering and growing that alchemy is why I'm still not bored with my business after almost 10 years doing this. I mean, it's always different. I always learn so much. It's always an amazing process
Right.
to watch unfold. And I think so. A lot of it depends on that initial call. And do I have someone on the phone who is clearly verbally extremely powerful and compelling, or is it someone who's very funny and fun, but their writing does a lot of the talking for them? Are they extremely photogenic? Are they natural and comfortable on camera, which is obviously a play towards video?
Sure.
Are they so it really depends on the strengths and weaknesses of the person as well as their platform, and a lot of it is where do they want to go. And I think that you and I, there's not enough money in the world to do all these things.
Yep.
To grow the speaking platform, to hit it out of the ballpark for PR, to become the New York Times bestselling author, to launch your docu-series on Amazon, to launch a product, to launch new offices. So I think a lot of it is goal oriented, and some people get on the line and they're very specific. They're like, I want to double the amount of my speaking fee with this book launch, or I want to double the number of my speaking engagements, or and some people have very, very different aspirations and goals.
So let's split that though, because the first thing I heard, and I think it's important, is finding the modality that's most comfortable for the thought leader, right? So some people, it's interesting, some writers, the natural lot, air quotes, is to be a speaker. And when you think about a lot of writers, it's the antithesis of who they are, is to be in the limelight as a public speaker, right? They're introverted, they're thoughtful, sort of a loner.
Exactly.
So, I love the way you're saying, listen, if the word is your canvas, cool. If video is your canvas, cool. I want to connect that to the audiences they're trying to reach and the goals, right? So you mentioned very specific goals. People are coming to you not for fame and glory, that might be a byproduct, but saying, hey, I want to double my speaker fee. I want to do 50 gigs this year instead of 20 gigs. There's an ROI and an investment piece there. How do you unpack that?
Absolutely. And that part is a little bit of, that's a little bit of the proposal. So really because as we know, I mean, sometimes I'll be honest with you, I don't know ahead of time. I can put an author on a long form radio show and their Amazon sales rank may skyrocket.
Sure.
Or nothing may happen. I may be able to book them on a primetime network TV show, and their ROI skyrockets, or nothing happens. So some of it is they may, there are times I have talked them into or coaxed authors into writing a column or contributing, and they get a huge consulting piece of business out of it. So some of this is a little bit, it's that alchemy of talking to the individual, looking at their goals, evaluating their strengths, looking at what's out there in terms of where their perfect audience may reside, so it's not a one thing. So I would probably propose a multifaceted proposal,
Sure. Okay.
which covers different bases. And then we try, and I'm a big fan of the month of like the 30-day plan,
Sure.
because often you put a 1-year proposal out there and then in 3 months you're like, wow, things have changed.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of,
the the author was all excited about TV, but it turns out that this other thing is really bringing it home, or the author, is getting tremendous traction in this area that they didn't even know about. It wasn't even on their radar 60 days ago. So I'm a big fan of you basically adjusting midstream and going with that 30-day plan where you lay out a strategic document that evaluates strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and you go with like a 12-month campaign. But then you really look at it every 30 days and you say, okay, what did we learn? What happened? What do we want to happen?
Right.
And how do we connect the dots in real time to achieve our goals?
Sure. Got it. So if I'm author or a thought leader speaker, anyone looking to hire a PR firm,
Yeah.
what are the and I hate to throw some in your profession under the bus, but like any profession, there's a continuum of really, really good to
Yeah.
really, really bad, right? It just is what it is. What are the things, and one of the things that I've seen quite often is really, really smart people, New York Times bestsellers, leading academics, etc., retain a PR firm for the wrong reasons with the wrong expectations and get, disappointing outcomes. And nothing's guaranteed, but what are the things I should be looking at when talking to a potential PR firm as I was about to, considering hiring one?
I would say to really track the proposal against your goals very tightly. So, and what the deliverables are, because, and this is, and
Okay.
I do understand this because this is, there is a lot of PR where, and especially with a bigger agency. And I think it's easier for the bigger agencies to lose that control. And I think that's one of the benefits of going small is because, like, quite frankly, we all know this, and, that you go to an agency that's bigger and you meet with the founder and they have something that they do that makes things happen, and then you end up with people that don't necessarily make things happen. I get those all the time. I get people all the time.
So ask who's going to do the work. I mean, something as simple as you might have a very reputable agency and you're meeting with someone with all the awards and accolades and they've done 50 New York Times bestsellers, but people often forget to say, well, who am I going to actually be interfacing with on a daily or weekly basis? Will I see you again?
Exactly. And does the person that they're interfacing with regularly, does that person really get them? Does
Yep.
that person really get their story? Does that person get their audience? Does that person get where they want to go, and where they want, more importantly, like, where do they want to be in 1 year, 5 years? I always ask those questions because that's so telling. I mean, it's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really important to, bring people closer to their goals, because if you're trying to launch a book so you can launch a bunch of products, that's a completely different campaign than if
Yep.
you're shooting for that, number one Amazon bestseller or number one New York Times bestseller, or if you're focusing on speaking or, contributing. So I think those are very, those are super. So I would say, and some of this is chemistry. Yeah, I think that you get on the phone with someone, and at the end of the day, when you hang up, do you feel like, okay, well, they're representing me now, they're my agency of record,
Right.
but, but you're kind of on the fence. Like, you don't really you're not really feeling so strong about your professional relationship, or,
Sure.
whether they get you. So I think that's, so if you're, as if you're going into this dialogue with some very specific things you want to achieve and some very specific, roles you want to take on, I think it'll be a much more productive dialogue regardless.
Got it. So oftentimes, what I see is the client is pretty clear about what they'd like to achieve. So I'd like to sell X number of books. I'd like to get on bigger stages. I'd like to, find 5 new consulting clients. Whatever. They've got their sort of business success metrics, and then they talk to a PR person that's very trustworthy, that comes well recommended, and there's a could be lingo, it could be language, it could be lack of understanding, where there's a path that they might take them down that they don't really understand and they feel embarrassed to ask. So what's the value of a retweet? What's the value of an Instagram followership being built and all that? And they're not asking enough questions. So how would you coach a potential client or someone looking to work with a PR firm to ask things that they don't understand?
And I would strongly encourage the asking, and because otherwise it just blows up. And this social media is a great example. I love social media, but at the same time, I also understand that I work with plenty of business clients who don't, and they don't value it. They don't see the ROI,
Sure.
so I think I separate how I use social media and how I know how to use social media with, it's basically, I'm not going to spend the next 6 months trying to talk them into like believing in social media. Like that, there's no time.
Yeah,
So,
right, right.
so I think that's part of, if a client feels that they're asking questions and the agency's like, but you got 4 retweets, and the client doesn't value it, then they're not going to want to pay for it. Yeah. I mean, so at the end of the day, they're just going to be unhappy and frustrated and leave.
Right,
Yeah. I mean, I
right.
think, and the relationship early. So I think that social media is a great example, because some people get it. And I have seen, there are definitely cases where I have watched blogger campaigns, move books to the top of lists and make things happen. But at the same time, to go into that and to say, here, these are impressions and these are part of your report for your PR. Yeah. I wouldn't even bother going there unless the client was on board with social media and believed in it, because otherwise it's just a waste of everybody's time.
Got it.
Yeah, it's yes. So social media is a great example. I think that this is where a customized approach is so critical, and I would advise anyone who's talking to a PR firm, if you're getting a proposal that feels cookie cutter, and you're getting a proposal that is touting things that you don't believe in. And I mean, a lot of people do want their books in for book awards.
Sure.
A lot of people do want social media, but if that's not where it's at, then I think honesty and clarity and having a good conversation around that is super important.
Well, and I would also say it's your money, so you would have,
Exactly.
you should be able to ask the questions that you need to understand why, what is the strategy behind the tactic? Why is building a followership on, in certain LinkedIn groups important, or on Instagram, whatever it is. And I think it's the obligation of the professional to say no, and here's why we believe that's a good idea. And then you can have a conversation and say, well, whether I like social media or not, I get it or I don't, or I believe in that or I don't.
Exactly.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. I want to pivot for a moment to podcasts. So podcasts have become a massive, let's call it, a thing, right? It's another place right now. And there's sort of two sides to the coin, right? There's being a guest, and the benefit of being the guest is you're hijacking someone else. Someone else has already done the hard work of finding a targeted audience that's related to what you do. And all you have to do is be charming for 20 or 30 minutes, right?
Yep.
Right. And then there's
Exactly.
the other side of that, which is, hosting your own, and, you get to throw the party every week and invite cool and interesting people to talk to build up your brand, et cetera. So sort of talk to me about both, because sometimes I think, and I want to get your take on this, people dive in too soon to host their own before sort of testing the waters being a guest for a while.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also think that people underestimate how much work it actually takes to produce a high quality podcast.
Right, right.
So I think there are a lot of, I'll just talk to someone and then pop up that interview and I'm a podcaster. But and actually most podcasts, I think, don't last more than 4 months or 5 months. I mean,
Yep.
the attrition rate is astronomical. But I do think that when I, when I, and I've been involved with a few, that are in the startup stage and morphing into the media company role and more of the docu-series video angle, but it's a lot of work. And whether the person is doing the work or they're hiring other people to do the work on their team or outsourcing it, as you know, producing a high quality podcast is not I mean, you made it sound very nice, like hop on the phone for 20 minutes, host a party and you're done. But we all know that's not just what it is.
Right.
So I think that is and also in terms of being that host, is that the right place? I mean, podcasts are definitely a thing. There's a lot of people listening. There's a lot of demand, but so is new miniseries on Netflix and Amazon,
Sure.
and so I think that again, it goes back to what are the strengths. And I actually did make a recommendation to one former client who I think you have had a conversation with, who that she should have a podcast, and I rarely make that recommendation, but she has tons of gravitas and amazing voice and a
Right,
brilliant
right.
woman, and she dismissed me and hated the idea, and then a year later she went back and did it, and she's got an amazing podcast. But she knew
Ah,
it'd be a bunch of work and that it was a big commitment. So I definitely think that for some authors and some thought leaders, maybe a podcast is the right thing, but they may get much more out of contributing regularly to a column. They may get much more out of a video series. They may get much more out of being a guest. So I would think that's part of evaluating, and not just, and I think that's some of it too, in terms of, whether publishing houses and publicity firms, it's encouraging people to just launch. But I think that what exactly are we launching, and who's it for?
I would also say, and a wise friend gave me some advice, I don't know, about a dozen years ago when I started to blog. And he said, if you're going to do it 100 times,
Yes.
and don't give up. And I'm a no patience, no attention span. I'm like 100 times to do anything. Oh my God. And he knew what he was talking about, because you do it 5 times, you do it 10 times, you do it 30 times, whatever, and then you start to look at the numbers and go, oh my God, how many hours of my time is that? And I got nothing for it. And then ultimately, well, I don't know in every case, but in many cases, once you hit a certain break point, there's a flywheel effect. So I know from my experience, in the beginning, I had to cash in some chips to get some friends and former colleagues and clients and such to be on my podcast, because I had no audience. I don't know what the heck I'm doing, right? And now that we've been doing it a year and a half, we've got 150 plus episodes out there. I'm getting pitched by reputable PR firms and podcast places to get real amazing guests on.
Yeah.
And it's got a and it's vetted, right? So you have to put out quality. Clearly, you've got to do it consistently, and ultimately the dividends, you'll get the dividends on it, but it's going to take way longer than you think.
Absolutely. And that commitment piece is huge. And that's, and I think maybe that's a part of like lining it up, because that's with everything. The same with contributors. I mean, I think, there are times I've worked with authors and they contribute 3 times and then they stop, and then there's like, they're just, and it's like, no, you have to build momentum, and you don't build momentum by doing it 3 times.
When you go on their website and the last blog post was from like May of 17, you're like, okay, so they're not interested in their content anymore. Why should I be? Right. So.
Exactly, and I think, but I think that all of this, it's, increasingly, that's the alchemy of lining up the platform with. I mean, clearly you love the podcasting game. You like, you're good at it. You like the conversation.
Well, it's because I'm a crappy writer. So this is like, I talk all day. So this is like so much easier for me. It's like being on the phone. So.
See, exactly. But for some people, if they'd rather write, then the whole like talking, hosting, producing,
Right.
delivering a podcast is a lot. So I think that lining up the strengths of the thought leader and the executive, so that they're not resenting, and that they're actually welcoming and enjoying this process, because whatever process they choose,
They have to enjoy it. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, but in order to do it 100 times, otherwise they're not going to do it 100 times.
So, sort of last area I want to focus on with you, because I'd feel remiss if we didn't hit on it, given your experiences. Let's talk books and book launches and realistic expectations and probabilistic outcomes. Right. So, I don't know about you, but my experience is, the new author, it's like coming to school with their brand new lunchbox, all giddy and excited and whatever, and they're going to launch this book, and it's going to be rainbows and fairy tales and unicorns and whatever. And they'll be on the Tonight Show and whatever, and then 5 months later they're drunk and depressed and whatever. So walk us through that process.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have to say, I tend to not work with first time authors that frequently because of this, because I hate to be the one crushing any expectations and saying, giving them the mathematical chances of not being on Oprah or the Tonight Show, which, all these things are like getting hit by lightning. It definitely happens. It's great when it does. Sometimes it really helps. Sometimes it doesn't. But I definitely think that once most people write more than one book. And I think all those hard lessons are the first book. And then I think once an author has been through it once, they're like, oh, yeah, they get it. That writing a book is hard and launching it is harder, and that more and more books are written, every year, and which is great, but which is also means that the landscape for competition is more significant. And I do think that there is an audience for every book, and there is wisdom in almost every book. I mean, I love that, but I think that the expectation of, and I do line it out for people and say, okay, these are the New York Times bestseller campaigns I've been on. Here's what they look like. These are the Amazon bestseller campaigns I've worked on, whether it's shooting for #1 or whether it's just a bestseller. This is what that looked like. are you, does how does that feel to you? How does that sound?
Well, and I find there's, I don't know how to frame it. There's a huge disconnect between, let's call it sort of the book publishing industry complex, whatever, and the author. So the publishers of the world look at a book as a seasonal item, right? So they're publishing this book, they're publishing it in May. It's going to have a 90-day time window, and then they're on to the next thing. Whereas an author, in almost every case, particularly in nonfiction business books, you should be looking at that book as something that an investment that you've made of your time, energy, and money that you're going to amortize the value that you extract from it over a 5 to 7 year period. So
Absolutely.
this get rich quick thing is for the most a fallacy.
Absolutely. And part of that is because, I mean, the reason my firm even exists is because the publishing industry kind of blew up. I mean, 20 years ago, the publisher would say to the author, great, we love your book. Here is your marketing person, here's your PR person,
Yep. Yep.
here is your book tour, here's your PR. They would do all these things, but they can't anymore. And the fact, and most of the time now they look, they give an author in advance and they say, well, how are you going to market your book? So they push it back to the author to make that
Yep.
investment. And the wonderful thing I will say about the publishing industry blowing up is that it did used to be much more that a book had like a lifetime of like 6 months to a year. But you're right. In this day and age, no, like we live in such a fragmented media world that you can absolutely talk about your book for 5 years. So I do think that the author dynamic, but the publisher can't. They're looking at the author to come out with new books, and then they can sell the backlist. But they have very different business models. I just think that nowadays the publishers make the overwhelming majority of their money on their top sellers, and everything else is a little bit gamble.
Yeah, it's become a Hollywood, a blockbuster model pretty
Exactly,
much, right? I mean,
exactly,
it's worse than the 80-20 rule. I mean, it's probably 1% of their books push 95%.
exactly.
Cool. So as we start to wrap up here, Sarah, any final thoughts or words of wisdom to our author and thought leader friends out there on things they should think about or do or not do or
I am a big fan of people, exploring their options and learning from their peers and listening to podcasts and reading articles. But in terms of overall advice, I would say to trust their instincts and to trust their own goals and objectives, and to talk through them with professionals, with trusted professionals, and with peers, and to line up some good goals and go for it.
great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it. And lots of good stuff going back and forth today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.